Today we're going to review all of Chapter 1. So a little bit of absolute value, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division of integers. And by the end of the day, you will continue to grow in your expertise of integer use. Copy and complete the statement using less than, greater than, or equal to. So we've got an absolute value of -8 and 3. Now remember, the absolute value of -8 is 8. So really, we're thinking, what do we put here? This is 8. This is still 3. 8 is greater than 3. So up here we put the absolute value of -8 is greater than 3. For number 2 over here, we have 7, and we have the absolute value of -7. Well, the absolute value of -7 is 7, and 7 is 7, of course. Those are equal. So we go back up here, 7 is equal to the absolute value of -7. For 3 and 4, if you'll remember back to the beginning of the year, these used to be hard problems for us. We have to put these in order from least to greatest. Well, I'm going to rewrite them here just as they are up there in the problem. -4, the absolute value of -5, the absolute value of -4, 3, and -6. Now, when I'm thinking of -4, it's just -4. But when I'm thinking of the absolute value of -5, I should be thinking, there's my thinking bubbles, of just 5, because the absolute value of -5 is 5. Likewise, the absolute value of -4 is 4. So that's what I'm thinking of. I do have to write down the values, the numbers that they gave us. 3 is just 3, and -6 is just -6. So now if I'm thinking, what's the coldest temperature out there? -6 is colder than anything else here. So -6 is the least, and this said from least to greatest. Well, now that I've used that one, I like to cross it off. The next thing, I only have one other negative up here, and that's -4. You might think, hey, those are negatives, but they're not really, because these are the absolute value of those negative numbers. So the only other negative I have here is -4. Now we go on to the positive side. Going up, 3 is the smallest out of these. So 3 comes next. And now I have 4, but I don't write 4. I write the absolute value of -4 because that's what they gave me. But that equals 4. And the largest thing that's up here, the greatest thing that's up here is 5. But I don't write 5. I write what they gave me, the absolute value of -5, which equals 5, of course. Same kind of a problem for number 4. Let me get some of this paper out of the way. And for number 4, rewriting them, I have 12, -8, the absolute value of -15, -10, and the absolute value of -9. So I have two absolute values here. Remember, the absolute value of -15 is 15, so that's what I'm thinking. The absolute value of -9 is 9, so that's what I'm thinking of. Now, the smallest thing up here, the coldest temperature, would be -10. So that's our least. I have another negative up here, and it is -8. Everything else has a positive value. I have a 9, a 15, and a 12. So 9 is the smallest. It's written the absolute value of -9, but we know what they mean. They mean 9. Make sure your lines are big enough to not look like ones. The next thing, I have a 12 and a 15. 12 is smaller, so there we go. And finally, I write this, the absolute value of -15. Those are in order from least to greatest. Moving down here, evaluate the expression. I've got adding and subtracting of integers, which we just did 2 days ago in our review. It goes all the way back to the beginning of the year. -3 plus -8. I have -3 plus -8. Same sign. So I add and keep. 3 plus 8 is 11. They were both negative, so it stays negative. Because when we add and subtract, we use the rule, same sign, add and keep, different sign, subtract, keep the sign of the larger number, which they mean the larger absolute value, of course. Negative 4 plus 16, different sign here, so we subtract and get 12, and we'll keep the sign of the positive because the positive number part was bigger than the negative number part. Number 7, 3 minus 9. Now, a lot of kids will just say 6 on that, but really we've got a positive 3 and a negative 9. So different sign, so we do subtract, but we keep the sign of the larger number part, which is our negative. So it's actually negative 6. And then number 8, we have negative 5 minus a negative 5. We remember that those two negatives next to each other is really negative 5 plus 5. So different sign, subtract. 5 minus 5 is 0. Oh, that makes sense because now I remember when we add opposites, we always get 0. And we don't have to worry about putting positive or negative because 0 is neither positive or negative. And the final ones that we'll do on this review, or a couple more actually, we will do evaluate the expression. So for this, number 9, it says 4 minus A minus C. A is negative 2, so now I have 4 minus, and for A I put in negative 2. Notice what's going on there. Minus C, which is 5, so minus 5. These two minuses make a big plus, and it becomes 4 plus 2 minus 5. 4 plus 2 is 6, minus 5 is 1. So 6 minus 5 equals 1. Number 10, the absolute value of B minus C, which is the absolute value of negative 8 for B, minus, and C is 5. Negative 8 minus 5, same sign, add and keep, but it's the absolute value of negative 13, which is 13. We'll do this one last problem that's a lot like something that's on your quiz. 11a, it says 2 climbers explore a cave. So here's our 2 climbers. Write an integer for the position of each climber relative to the surface. Well, they're both below the surface. So they'll both have negative integers. This one will be a negative 10, and this one will be a negative 7. For part B, which integer in part A is greater? Well, here's our 2 integers in part A. Which one's greater? Now remember, when we're on the negative side of things, the closer to 0, the greater the number. Negative 7 is closer to 0. Or you can think of which would be a warmer temperature. Negative 7, although very cold, is warmer than negative 10. So negative 7 is the greater integer. For part C, which integer in part A, so we're going back to part A here, has the greater absolute value? The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. The absolute value of negative 7 is 7. Which one's greater? 10 is greater, of course. So negative 10 has a greater absolute value. And a little review on our multiplying and dividing here. So this is a different quiz that we're going to use, but number 1 here says negative 7, and it's right up next to our 6 here with parentheses. So this is negative 7 times 6. Negative 7 times 6. Well, we know 6 times 7 is 42. Or hopefully you do. Different sign, so negative 42. Number 2, negative 1 times negative 10. Well, 1 times 10 is 10. And same sign, so it's going to be positive 10. Number 3, this is negative 72 divided by negative 9. Well, I know my answer is going to be positive because they're the same sign. And I also know 9 times 8 is how I get 72. So 72 divided by 9 is 8. And again, it's positive because same sign, positive. Number 4, negative 24 divided by 3. This time I know my answer is going to be negative because different sign, negative when we're multiplying and dividing. And 24 divided by 3 is 8, because I know 8 times 3 is 24. Number 5, negative 3 times 4 times negative 6. Well, if you'll recall, an even number of negatives gives us a positive. An odd number of negatives gives us a negative. Or we could just take it one step at a time and it'll work out. Here we have negative 3 times positive 4, which would be negative 12, different sign, negative, times negative 6. Now, same sign, positive, and 6 times 12 is 72. Or we could have just said it's going to be positive because there's an even number here, so we knew it was going to be positive because there's an even number of negatives. And you could have multiplied these in any order. You could have done 6 times 3 is 18, times 4 is 72. 6 times 4 is 24, times 3 is 72. But just going from left to right, I thought that was pretty easy. Number 6, the parentheses are important here. Negative 3 to the third power. It means that applies to everything in the parentheses. So negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. An odd number of negatives means we're going to have a negative. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. Positive 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. So negative 27.